Hi everyone, Paul Cardin here of the Wirral In It Together blog. This video is a follow-up to an original blog post on Wirral In It Together from October last year, which is named as follows: Council tax cash for honours, the quid pro quo, freedom of the Borough of Wirral ×2 in return for huge cash favours bestowed upon councillors. It's a bit of a mouthful, but please see the description box below to access this link. So this is all about council tax cash for honours, and the alleged honours in this case being the freedom of the Borough of Wirral. The best place to start here is by announcing that 2020's new council tax demands are hitting our doormats right now. This year, despite the coronavirus, the lockdown we're all in, and council members and senior officers knocking each other out of the way to be first to tell us that they're here to support us, the planned council tax increases are going full steam ahead. Personally, we'll now be paying £151.34 every month. I know the figure varies right across the country, but here that corresponds to an annual increase of £93.40. And you don't get to say no. It's like the licence fee for the BBC, otherwise known as the propaganda arm of the UK establishment, where payment is compulsory if you watch any broadcast TV service, no matter what channel, and even if you choose never to watch the BBC. Many of you will remember that famous principled man of this borough, Roger Hayes. Roger decided a few years ago now, but I think around 2012, to withhold his council tax, and figuratively speaking, very quickly, his arm was grabbed, twisted up his back, he was forced against the wall, frisked, pockets emptied, and then marched down a corridor. At the end of that corridor was a beckoning prison cell where he spent the next 21 days, following a secretly held trial where he couldn't even be represented. And Roger was illegally imprisoned thanks to the UK justice system. Anyway, I posted the aforementioned item on my blog Wirral In It Together around October last year and quickly forgot about it. But I was having another dig around yesterday, noticed it, and thought that would make a good presentation. So here we are with that video. And it's all based on a news story in the Wirral Globe about someone called Dr. Nunzia Bertavi, a local lady who was being nominated for the freedom of the borough. This was dated 9th of October 2019. So, first of all, what is the freedom of the borough? The origin of the freedom of the borough goes back to early medieval times when, with the growth of the great English towns, there emerged a class of citizen known as freemen, who enjoyed important privileges of their own, in government and in corporate property, as opposed to the strangers and the rest of the inhabitants of the towns. So it sounds like these government and property people may have easily qualified as the elite people of the time, and were seen as a league above the rest of the hoi polloi. Maybe they were the corporate, government and property psycho and sociopaths of that time, just like the beloved 1% of the 20th century, the 21st century. Or maybe you think I'm being a bit too cynical? Well, I think passively cynical is okay because it's educational and people get to learn about what's going on and who their enemies really are. Whereas actively cynical is where things get problematic because people get hurt, don't they? So active cynicism is the realm of the bullies, the gaslighters, and those bent on tax avoidance, self-enrichment, etc. Anyway, back to the script. With the passing of the Honorary Freedom of the Boroughs Act 1885, the quote-unquote dignity attached to the office of freeman was revived and enhanced. This act conferred upon all municipal corporations the power to admit as honorary freemen of the borough, quote-unquote, persons of distinction and any persons who have rendered eminent services to the borough, This can only be achieved by the council voting at a specially called meeting, which is how things still stand today. So, on to the content of this video. On the surface, it's an insignificant throwaway item really. It's an absolutely tedious, nothing story which I spotted last October in the online Wirral Globe, a local newspaper, a site I don't visit very much these days since it got captured and swallowed up by Wirral Council. And there's a link to that Wirral Globe article in the show notes below. Along with Dr. Nunzia Bertali, also up for a Freedom of the Borough Award, a posthumous one, was an American airman called J. Frederick Simpson, who during World War II died after guiding his doomed plane away from houses in Sorgulnassi, thereby avoiding certain casualties on the ground. But for the purposes of this video, we are not focusing on the American airman, brave though he was. His nomination for the award will only draw attention away from the main event, i.e. Freedom of the Borough of Wirral for Dr. Nunzia Bertali of the Italian Consular Office in Birkenhead. Who the hell is that, we hear you cry? Well, she was nominated in 2016 by the then council leader and now former councillor Phil Davis. Let's read what he wrote about her. Dr. Nunzia Bertali is of Italian origin and now a British citizen. I can think of few people who have demonstrated their love and affection for the borough and its population than Dr. Bertali. She never misses an opportunity to promote the borough to businesses and other stakeholders. In terms of evidence in support of this application, may I request that the panel asks for a testimonial for Dr. Bertali from former Wirral Council Chief Executive Mr. Steve Maddox, who is totally supportive of conferring this honour on Dr. Bertali. Steve worked closely with Dr. Bertali in his time as Chief Executive. So why did he put a full stop after the words Chief Executive? I ask because he's carefully omitted to mention the fact that the former Wirral Council Chief Executive Steve Maddox was already a recipient of the Freedom of the Borough in 2010. So how can an existing award winner recommend someone else for the same award? Is this all above board? It sounds a little incestuous to me. So basically Dr. Bertali deserves Freedom of the Borough of Wirral for doing the job in a consulate in Birkenhead and because she quote unquote loves Wirral. If Phil Davis is nominating her, I assume there must be a whole lot more to this non-story than meets the eye. So let's try and draw back the veil. With her friend Steve Maddox already in it and beckoning her to join him, this Freedom of the Borough thing is now starting to look a bit like an exclusive private members club. So we'll move on to the most important and crucial aspect to this. Here is an old story drawn from one of our much earlier blog posts in May 2013, entitled, all in capitals, See How Wirral Councillors Filled Their Pockets Back in 2002/3 shocking exclamation mark. Again, there's a handy link to this blog post in the show notes below. A number of the Wirral councillors serving here 10-20 years ago are still here today, and my God, do these people have long memories when it comes to calling up and returning favours long bestowed. For example, the councillors in the frame here will remember with fondness that time in summer 2002, 18 years ago, when a panel of specially chosen people met to discuss the small matter of a pay rise for councillors. And they'll recall with pleasure how a panel of carefully chosen people, which included a certain Dr. Nunzia Bertali, signed off a monster cheque in the form of an inflation-busting pay hike for all 66 Wirral councillors. And we'll tell you exactly how inflation-busting that pay hike was later. Can you see where this is leading to yet? Before this scam could occur, and luckily for the councillors who were being awarded the cash, they'd granted themselves leeway to choose their own people for this important task. So despite Wirral Council operating under alleged democratic values and supposed rule of the people, by the people and for the people, these rules were clearly being bent to suit those who were lining up to be awarded the extra money. So, in what walk of life do those in receipt of public money get the opportunity to design the process for themselves and decide who is going to grant them loads of money? Well, I can answer that question. When you're a councillor at Wirral Council. This is how deeply corrupt these organisations are. Before sitting for the first time, the panel was given the prefix independent in an attempt to throw any busybody, suspicious employees or members of the public. So, as has become customary for power-abusing Wirral councillors, it was all carried out in secret with absolutely no minutes taken, absolutely no public notes, and definitely no public announcements, because that would have left an awkward paper trail that might have needed explaining away at some point. This brand of secretive behaviour also has a ready-made defence. It's described as having the ability to operate in a safe space with no unwanted chilling effect, and therefore to be able to engage in free and frank discussions and to conscientiously serve the wider public interest without fear or favour, or some shite along those lines. The big problem here was we, the people coughing up our council tax, couldn't drop in to get some oversight to see how much of our money was being spent on this. In fact, the public had been skillfully sidelined and we had no way of knowing what was going on. The independent remuneration panel met a few times, and for anybody out there worried that they would be worked like dogs and made to give freely of their time, relax. This was quickly sorted. They were remunerated handsomely from the bulging council tax coffers. However, the exact details of the remuneration figure awarded was never released to the public. So in summary, it was another one of those mysterious stitch-up jobs, all shrouded in secrecy. But we can assume there was a generous quid pro quo, and that will become clearer as we proceed and the facts start to emerge. Keep watching and listening, and you'll pick up on it very soon. Back in 2002, I was a lighting engineer with access to Wirral Council's internal intranet system. I remember how I quickly smelled a rat and got onto it immediately. In my lunch breaks at the Highway Services Department, Town Hall, Civic Way, Bebington, CH63 7RX, I would seek out and access the information. I discovered that the chair of this panel of co-opted outsiders was a former council chief executive officer called Don Latham, who was also an author and a religious zealot. He was also a busy boy in his spare time, was Donald. Here's a picture of one of his religious books entitled Being Unmistakably Christian at Work. And I soon found that he'd been unmistakably Christian here on Wirral and had received £2,000 straight into his arse pocket per sitting, no questions asked. News of these payments had never been announced to the Wirral public. Remember folks, this £2,000 a time was the going rate 18 long years ago. Obviously holidays in the south of France didn't come cheap back then, and they certainly don't now. Another pious sort sitting on the same panel was the then Bishop of Birkenhead, the Right Reverend David Urquhart. And what did I find out about him? Here's another story in the Wirral Globe which tells us that in 2006 the Right Reverend David Urquhart received the award of Freedom of the Borough of Wirral 4 years after the councillors were given a pay rise. So that's now 2 members of the same extremely generous independent panel who've had their names put up in lights in recognition of their secret largesse with public money, money which found its way unannounced straight into the pockets of 66 very grateful Wirral councillors. This story may be all about honours, but personally we don't think this conduct is honourable at all, not one bit. In fact, it seems rather grubby and all a bit sordid. And frankly, if this is council tax cash for honours, then it reeks to high heaven. And the co-opting of two religious evangelicals, one of whom is now a very senior man of the cloth, sitting in the House of Lords as the Bishop of Birmingham, just to grant it an air of respectability, makes it even more corrupt. Oh, to hell with it. Here's confirmation of what we're saying. So we're now just waiting for the second member of this very generous, with other people's money, independent panel, Dr. Nunzia Bertali, to be given her reward and added to the roll of honour, along with Maddox and Urquhart. In years to come, can we expect a third member of the panel, Unilever's Switzerland-based Jerry Hare, to join his fellow schmoozers, Bertali, Urquhart and Maddox on the above list? It's certainly looking possible because although he's now based in Switzerland, he works for the same company as former council leader Steve Fowkes, Unilever, so they obviously know each other. That's certainly the direction of travel here, isn't it? Anyway, the details are all laid out inside a link in the description box below. And finally, here's the pièce de résistance you've been waiting for, the main item on the menu, the full details of those annual pay rise highlights from 18 years ago. That obscene pay hike in full. Council leader, Councillor Steve Fowkes, a Unilever senior technologist who works for process development, so he's now on about 50,000 per annum anyway, a 36% increase, up £5,750 to 21,750. Not bad, is it? Money seems to attract even more money here. Opposition leader, unknown Tory councillor, 30.5% increase, up £3,050 equals to 13,050. All 64 remaining councillors of all parties, 16% increase, up £1,200 to 8,700. I checked the UK inflation rate in 2002, turns out it was 1.62%, so Steve Fowkes' pay hike was 22.5 times the rate of inflation. Not bad rates these, are they? I suppose you could call it mates rates. Nunzia Bertali was a mate of Phil Davis, who was a mate of Steve Fowkes, and took over from him as council leader. Nunzia Bertali was also a mate of Steve Maddox, a prior recipient of Freedom of the Borough, and a mate of Phil Davis and Steve Fowkes. Jerry Hare was a mate of Steve Fowkes in the sense that he worked with him at Unilever. Don Latham and the very right Reverend were mates under the blessed Lord God our Father, no less. So while a total of £85,600 was lavished upon 66 Wirral councillors of all parties in that year alone, which became hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds in subsequent years, junior council workers, of whom I was one at the time, were being treated like shite as usual. We were forced out of the door on strike as a result, and in the end the bastards drove a hard bargain and we had to settle for 3%, completely unaware of what was going on, out of sight and out of mind, and the greed that was being indulged in and played out behind a veil of secrecy. Our union, Unison, always deep into the pockets of management, would have been in on it, and who knows, maybe taking a bit of a cut themselves, but that's another story. Back then, in between going to quizzes at Stanley's Cask and drowning my sorrows and falling down drunk in the tavern in Wallasey, with the measly few quid I had left, I'd go into work, go onto the office computer, access the intranet, and search out the above information on these committees and panels, which had all been carefully kept out of sight of the general public who were funding it. I then went home with it and used the very ancient desktop publishing software of the time to create the above leaflet. Chug chug, it's the gravy train. How are your councillors paid? Again, as that's pretty impossible for you to read on your screens, have a look in the description box below and you'll find a link to this leaflet. The Gravy Train, issue 1, July 2002, was pinned up on all the communal notice boards of the Council's Highway Services Department in Bebington, with the intention of revealing to staff the true calibre of the councillor and senior officer dross that ruled over them, and that they'd been busting a gut for day in, day out. Not very long after this, I became a marked man when I blew the whistle on a street lighting overtime scam valued in the mid £30,000 per annum, only to get clobbered with a range of bogus gross misconduct charges. I was then advised I was out of step with the rest of the team, which I was, and told to prepare for the high jump, which never actually happened because I wiped the floor with the pricks, overturned the bogus charges, resigned, and got a better paid job. And again, there's a link to that story below. To finish on a positive note, the Wirral Council webpage reassures us under financial implications that a Freedom Scroll for winning candidates costs only £855.50 each. Cheers everyone, Paul signing off, and I'll see you next time. Take care.